There we are. So yes, just to reiterate, welcome to English Wine Online. We have 6 English wines to show you this evening. Unfortunately, nothing sparkling, because the little pouches we use, they don't go very well with sparkling wine because they lose the pressure and then you lose the fizz, and they don't keep very well. So sparkling wine is best enjoyed from the bottle, not from the pouches, I'm afraid. But we've got six wines to show you this evening. Something that I found online when I was doing some research for this, a little quote from the winemaker at Hattingley Valley. In quotes, "People used to laugh at English wine. They don't seem to be laughing anymore." I quite liked that. Short and sweet. It has gone leaps and bounds in the last sort of 20, 30 years. Certainly when I joined the wine industry 22 years ago, there was nothing. English wine was nothing. You might have one sparkly that was just sourced from down the road, but you very, very rarely saw anything. So to get to the point where we are now is very exciting. And as we've got this little snapshot of Concord, yes. Was that even wine? Can they call it wine these days? I'm not sure. Sparkling grape juice with a little bit of alcohol in it, possibly. That's quite funny. Well remembered.
I was at Wroxall Vineyard a few weeks ago. So Wroxall is one of the pioneer vineyards. So Sharpham was planted about 40 years ago. Have we got Sharpham today?
We have. Breaky Bottom was one of the first, wasn't it?
Breaky Bottom, 1974. Peter Hall, planted his Breaky Bottom. But Wroxall was pretty early as well, so in Somerset. And they had, in the tasting room there, a bottle of 1982 Saval Blanc. A still wine. Now, if anybody did try English wine 40 years ago, what the most dominant feature of it was its acidity. It had this incredible, racy, strident acidity.
Strident. Can we say put it on your chips acidity?
So, yes, we can say put it on your chips acidity. And if you open a bottle of 1982 Wroxall Vineyard, that acidity is still there.
Still there.
It hasn't gone away.
But it's a good thing to mention, and I think we are getting warmer, and some of the years we've got here really highlight that, as well as to get in some of the sugar levels and the fruit quality in there. But we always have got a level of acidity, and actually that is one of the reasons why our sparkling wine is so successful, because it maintains its acidity. You don't want the temperatures too high or too much sunshine for that. But what we've done, actually, and subconsciously, we didn't realise we'd actually done this until I noticed today. All planned, I promise. We have got the 3 most planted grape varieties in England, and that is Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Bacchus. And we've got 2 examples of each wine, of each grape variety, but hopefully they are very, very different. So without further ado, I know some of you are miles ahead of me already, but I've actually poured my 1 and 2 glasses next to each other. If you're able to do that, brilliant. If you can't, just do one after the other, but we will talk about them as we go through. So the first one is Lyme Bay Bacchus. And if I can get my screen save to work, because I know you've got the little, sorry, I know you've got the little picture on the bottle, but it doesn't always show you much. So I should. Can you see this?
Yes. Do you want to do it as a slide? There we go. Beautiful. There
we go. So this is what the bottle looks like. They've recently rebranded it. It used to be this wonderful sort of ethereal watercolor picture, but they've made it lovely and a bit more simple, for want of a better word, and in a positive way. It's simple. It's almost francophile in the way that it's packaged now, whereas before they had Lyme Bay actually on the label, the actual bay itself, not just the words. Now it's much more clean, very elegant, I think. And that sort of gives an indication of what we can expect from the bottle as well. So all the details are on there, 2020, 11%, and the price, but that is on your sheet as well. So the sheet that came with your pack.
So I think what's also interesting, if you just go back to the picture, Pip, because there is so on there's a couple of contradictions which are probably just worth explaining. So if we bring the picture back up, you'll see on the bottle it says Devon, England, but then in brackets on the details, Pip has put Essex, Kent and Hereford. So I think this is unusual in English wines, insofar as Lyme Bay don't have any vineyards. So if anybody ever goes to visit Lyme Bay, they're on an industrial estate in Exminster. It's very pretty.
There's a very good coffee shop there.
Lovely coffee across.
Very good coffee shop.
Yeah, but
across
they have
the car park.
So Lyme Bay buy all of their grapes in, and so the grapes here, as it says on the sheet, are from Essex, Kent, and Hereford, and not from Devon. So although it says Devon, England on the bottle, because that's where the wine is made, actually the grapes come from across England. So should we have a taste?
Let's. And the reason they've done that is because they believe at the moment the fruit that they can source from the east of England is riper. It's got more punch and a bit more powerful than what we're getting if they had their own vineyards here. But it's a lot of English wineries do it. They use a lot of their own fruit, but then source from other growers as well. And they'll have these long-term contracts going with these growers. So everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what they're getting. Everybody knows what the expectations are. So Bacchus,
it does sort of ruin my next point though, Pip, which is one I was on with Toby Buckland on Sunday on Radio Devon. Sorry, I'm just gonna brag a little bit now about the fact that I was on Radio Devon with Toby on Sunday, and I took this wine in, and we were talking about Garrigue. So just that if everyone's familiar, we've talked about it in the past. So this southern French wines, Rhone, often taste of Garrigue, and Garrigue is this word to describe the herbs that grow naturally in that part of the world, and the wines often reflect that. So you often get rosemary or thyme or sage notes that come through in the wine. And Toby came up with an idea for this because it comes from Devon, and when you stick your nose in it, I don't know what anybody else is getting, but you do get some elements of elderflower, maybe a bit of cut grass and some fruit in there as well. And so Toby said, well, the equivalent of Garrigue here would be Devon Bank. This tastes of Devon Bank rather than, so it's our equivalent of Garrigue.
It is, and there's something, I don't know if there's any northerners. Oh, Nikki, you're in the north. Oh, somebody's in the north. I've definitely sent a pack to York.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Biddeford.
No, I've definitely sent a pack to York. Anyway, somebody is in the north. We call it May, which just sounds like MEH to normal people, but I promise you it's MAY. The Mayflower. Normal people call it hawthorn. But it's that wonderful aroma that you get when you're driving through the country lanes in May, funnily enough, because that's when it's out. And then if the farmers are trimming the hedgerows, that lovely, almost astringent, slightly herbal, slightly woody, slightly floral smell that you get, that is the hedgerow, that is the Mayflower. It's absolutely beautiful. I've got you confused with someone else, Nikki. I do apologise. I've definitely sent something to York. Maybe we're sending the recording to them. But yes, it's absolutely right. Hedgerow and minerality as well, because a lot of the vines are fairly close to the sea down in the southeast, and you get that slight salinity. But we're telling you what's in there. We want you to tell us what's in there. What else are you smelling? What are you tasting?
It's wonderfully light as well, isn't it? The colour. You know, when you look at it,
very pale.
Let's pick it up. It's so pale. And actually, interestingly, at the tasting we did at Powderham Castle, this was the most popular wine out of everything we showed, and that's from all around the world. Yeah. You know, we showed 60 or so wines there. This was the wine that everybody really, really loved.
I think it just took people by surprise as well. Often, many of them, certainly that I was showing it to, they'd never had an English wine before, or certainly not an English still wine before. And the way that they've sort of marketed themselves with Bacchus is it's kind of if you imagine the smell of a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, really punchy and lime and passion fruity, and you imagine the smell of a French Sauvignon Blanc, particularly Loire Valley, much more nettly gooseberry, if you imagine something in the middle, that's kind of what you're getting from an English Bacchus. So they've often said, if you like Sauvignon Blanc, the chances are you're going to like Bacchus. So it's a very similar concept. And actually, if we look at where it comes from, so it's a crossing originally. It was produced in, just have to check my notes, I do apologise, 1933, all that way back in Germany.
You have a beautiful name, really. So it's not actually called Bacchus, is it? It's got a real, its proper name is something far more beautiful, I think.
I didn't get that bit, I just got Bacchus.
Yes, no, it's called Geil Weilerhof 3329 133. Yeah,
that one. It was on the tip of my tongue. Yeah. Literally on the tip of my tongue. That one, made in Germany. Don't know if you picked that up. But so it's quite interesting actually, because there is a grape called Müller-Thurgau. Thanks, Alexa. A grape called Müller-Thurgau, which if back in the sort of 70s, 80s, if you had Black Tower, Blue Nun, which I'm sure we all did, the likes of that, we assumed it was Riesling because it came from Germany, but it was more likely to be Müller-Thurgau, that was produced by crossing a grape called Silvaner, which pretty much grows like ivy, and a grape called Riesling, which you're probably familiar with as being very citrusy and sherbety. So it was produced so that you could get a full flavoured wine that grew lots and lots of grapes, had a very high yield. But what we actually got was Blue Nun and Black Tower. So Bacchus...
I was going to say, it was also good because it can ripen, can't it? So one of the things that a lot of the German clones are good for is ripening in cooler climates. So that's one of the other benefits, although it's also incredibly prolific, but you can grow it in quite cool places.
Yeah,
so that
I was getting to that, but thank you for
Sorry.
Sorry. I was getting there. We chatted before, I promise. So what they've done is essentially crossed Müller-Thurgau back with Silvaner and Riesling, so that it essentially ends up with its original characteristics, but almost going backwards. And yeah, as Dan said, it likes cooler climates. That's why it's growing really, really well here. And it also ripens very, very early as well. And the reason it's called Bacchus is because Bacchus is the Roman equivalent of Dionysus, the Greek god of wine. Everybody knows them as the Greek and Roman god of wine. What they don't add is the extra bit, which is debauchery.
Oh, hurrah.
Hurrah. I know, I'm at that party.
Tracy,
yeah,
so there's a question, sorry, just on because I know we there's a question from Tracy. Will you be sharing the ABV? I think that was on the opening slide.
It was 11 on this one.
And the sugar content, do we know what the sugar is in this one?
I didn't find it, but I would guess at probably about 1 to 2 grams per litre.
It's quite low residual sugar in this
Very
one.
low.
Yeah. Although it tastes quite fruity, Tracy, so you could be forgiven for thinking that there is more residual sugar in this.
Yes.
It has those wonderful fruit flavours, but wait until you try number 2 and then see
exactly.
Where you
if you haven't already, please do move on to 2. I mean, I've been doing mine side by side just to sort of get an idea, because on the first one we've talked about acidity, and it is really acidic, and as people have commented, the smell, it just leaps out of the glass at you, almost New World style, and very aromatic. Lots of fresh herbs, lots of fresh florals, really, really fruity, sort of grapefruit, guava kind of fruits. It's only recently I actually smelt a guava, so now I know what it is. I'm using it all the time.
And apparently in New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, guava is a fault.
Correct. Same as capsaicin, capsicum. Yes, I fought that at the IWC one year. No, it's a fault. I lost my train of thought. Yeah, so it's very acidic, but it is very, very fruity, and actually I think quite well textured. Often, sometimes a Bacchus can be just very austere and teeth stripping. This has got a lot of texture, to it, and actually it balances the acidity very well, so it doesn't feel too aggressive at all. So if you move on to the second Bacchus, which is called Stop Ferment. Oh, sorry, one thing I haven't done for you is show you a picture of the winemaker just before we move off from Lyme Bay. Let me find my screen share button.
Don't tell me it's a picture of a winemaker with Dan.
Actually not, no. Do you know, actually there is one coming up where I could have chosen a picture of Dan and I didn't.
I'm sure there's a picture of James and I somewhere. We were in Germany having dinner recently.
Oh, I could, in that case, we could do the video of me beer bat flipping.
Yes, beer bats, yes.
An old skill and refound, who knew? So this is James Lambert's looking very nonchalant, leaning against his barrels with a nice pupitre in the background. So he's the winemaker at Lyme Bay, just in case you're ever at a trade fair and bump into him, do say hi.
And as we were saying earlier, so they buy these grapes in, and for all the wines they make at Lyme Bay, they buy their grapes in. And one of the things that they are really pushing at Lyme Bay at the moment is sort of single vineyard selections as well. So this one comes from different vineyards, Essex, Kent and Hereford, like we mentioned earlier, and what they're doing is looking for the best quality wines to put in to make their wines with. But they're also looking to showcase, you know, sort of real terroir within the UK as well. So although they are slightly more expensive, if you get the opportunity to try one of their single vineyard Chardonnay or single vineyard Pinot Noir, they are really stunning wines that I think will surprise people just how good English still wines are now. And we did a blind taste last year where we put the Lyme Bay Pinot Noir up against a Burgundian Pinot Noir, and although Burgundy won, everybody on the panel, which was Oz Clarke, Susie Atkins, Mike Best, Master of Wine, and Pip Vanham, everybody found it quite difficult to make their decision, because there's so much impressive about English still wines now, Pinot Noir, especially those in this instance that come from Essex and the Crouch Valley. And as Leanne Stevens says in the chat, the Lyme Bay Pinot Noir is fab.
It is fab. But I think the point that we highlighted on that tasting as well, just to go off point a tiny bit, we did an English sparkling wine versus a champagne at a similar price point. English sparkling wine won, hands down. We did actually a wine that's coming up, the Native Grace Chardonnay versus a white Burgundy Chardonnay of a similar price point, and the English wine absolutely wiped the floor with the Burgundian one. So then to have the Lyme Bay Pinot Noir and the Burgundian one sort of, oh, not sure, people were really quite torn. So to have our winemaking that's really relatively young versus generations and generations and generations, it's huge kudos, frankly, I think.
And it just shows how far English wine has come, doesn't it? You know, when we talked about that, you know, incredible acidity that you used to get, that, you know, piercing acidity, that's calmed down, and you're getting this riper fruit. And I think the first one, the Lyme Bay, is a real good example of that, of this riper fruit that's creating this fuller body. You've still got the acidity there, but the fruit is able to combat it, and the two work really nicely in harmony with each other.
Indeed. I'm just replying to Debbie, sorry.
So Debbie's just having to pop off. So we're going to move on to wine number 2. Are we all right just to pop up the screen, Pip?
Right on it now. It should pop out in a second. Why isn't it popped out from current screen? There we are. Sharpham Bacchus Ferment. So exactly the same grape variety. So you will notice hints and flavours and textures that are similar to the one that we've just had. But this one is called Stop Ferment. And that is literally what they've done. 2022, 11%. And I know this one is 6 grams per litre, because I'm a nerd like that. So not actually that much, but when you taste the two together, you really can feel and detect that separate level of sweetness. So Stop Ferment literally means exactly that. They stop the ferment. It's like, it does what it says on the tin. It's one of those. They start the fermentation with the Bacchus, and then pretty much 3-4 times a day, they're going along and tasting it, and just to check for how the acidity and the sweetness are balancing. And just when it gets to the right level that they believe this is perfect, we want to keep that sweetness, they chill it right down to about 4 degrees, 2 to 4 degrees, and that stops the yeast from working. And then they rack it off into a different tank, and you've stopped the fermentation. They then leave it to just sort of sit and be calm for a little while before they then bottle it. Because if you bottled it straight away, the acidity would just be a little bit jarring, a bit harsh. So just let it just relax a little bit, just for a few weeks in the tank, and then we bottle it and then release it. What do you think?
Well, actually, when it was bottled, so I tried this not long after it was bottled, and the acidity was still quite high at that point, and I was a little bit sort of concerned before we sort of went ahead and bought it, because I thought, oh, but actually it's calmed down. I think it's calmed down now quite nicely, and the two are pretty well balanced.
I think this is delicious. I could very happily sit on a beach somewhere in South Devon with some fish and chips and get through most of a bottle of that. I think it would be delightful.
It would be a good pair, wouldn't it, with fish and chips?
Oh, I like that, Nikki. Honey and lemon, perfect, because you've got it's the sweetness, but it's not really sweet. There's just something underlying, and then really lemony, like lemon zest and lemon juice, lots of different, almost like candied lemon. And again, so for me, it's sort of pink grapefruit.
I think with it you get that, like the ripeness of the fruit. I think you can sort of see the difference between the previous example where it's coming further east and this one, which is obviously in the west, because I think the first one you get more slightly tropical, maybe stone fruit flavors, which you don't really get with this one. I don't think. I think this one is more Devonshire in that it's more restrained, it's more delicate, it's more almost green, I think, in a way.
I think so. I'm just churning it with some rather mature Quicks cheddar, also from Devon. Goes with it, and all that.
Salty snacks, Nikki. Is that salt and vinegar? Not salt and vinegar. Ready salted crisps have we got with this? No, not today.
Not today. What are people nibbling though? What have you tried that's going with it?
I am going to try it with some Devon blue cheese.
What was that, Nikki?
11% Leanne, so Leanne's just after the ABV.
Mini mix, brilliant. 11% that one, yep.
I think this is much more of a food wine than the other one. The other one was a lovely aperitif wine, whereas this there's a sort of creaminess to the texture. It's almost sort of a bit like a mellow type texture to it, but not quite.
Yeah, indeed. And interestingly, it hasn't gone through mallow, this one, because of the way it's been made, but it has, it's the sugar, it's the sweetness that's giving it that little hint of texture.
It works with the Devon blue.
Good.
That's a good combination.
Oh, sorry, Leanne, I checked our website, not their website. Maybe that might have been. Can you check, Dan, what the ABV is? If their website says 9, I'd go with that. That's my mistake. Sorry, I checked our website, not theirs.
I was going to say, it does sound quite low, 9%.
It sounds more likely, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will check now.
Thanks. So we've got 2 Bacchus, and interesting comment there from Chris about the Seb's having Devon blue too. Well done. Interesting comment from, beg your pardon, Tracy. Sorry, grapefruit, but also a little petrol, which is interesting because petrol is one of those characteristics that we associate with Riesling. So if we think of the parentage, that makes sense. Some people will pick it up as minerality, that wonderful word. Some people pick it up as sort of more of a wet stone kind of quality. But yes, there's definitely something in there that's slightly more mineral, more savoury. Oh, tagliata.
So the Sharpham website.
Sorry, I'm amazed at all these wonderful cheeses that are being tried tonight and different things. This is very exciting.
The Sharpham website says ABV is 9%. So
okay, let's go with that. We stand corrected. Thank you, Leanne.
Check with the winery tomorrow and find out, and then I'll update our website with the correct ABV.
Marvelous.
If we got it wrong.
And the slide as well.
Yes.
Yes. So I know I normally do this at the end, but I would just like to know who preferred, of the two that we've just done, do you have favourites? Who preferred number one?
Both of us.
Who preferred number two? Two for Seb, one for Tracy and Zoltan and Alexa. Oh, one's doing very well. Both. Well done, Nikki. That's always the third option. And I think I like them both. As I say, I would quite happily quaff either of them. But I think the second one, I think Chris's comment about having the food more food friendly with the second one, more aperitif with the first, although it would go very well. Guts, cheese, seafood, particularly shellfish. Remember, I always talk about when you've got acidity, it works very well with food that have acidity. So cheese always works well because of the lactic acid, but any dish that you would be served with a wedge of lemon or lime and you sort of season it with your citrus, that is always going to help balance with the acidity in the wine. But they've both shown very nicely, I think. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything else that I haven't said, Dan?
You do always cheat, Pip, when we come to choose our favourite, and you always choose all of them.
Of course. I never have an actual favourite. There's always different reasons, aren't there?
Well, I know there's always different reasons why one could be preferred over the other. But yes.
Whenever, because I do some wine education and bits and pieces. Don't tell Dan for another. Been doing it for years. And I often get asked, what's your favourite wine? And my immediate answer is, who's paying? Because that was very, very important to what is going to be my favourite. I think it is, Nikki. Dan will be able to correct me.
It is, yes. So all of the grapes for this come from the vineyards down at Sandridge Barton, so on the River Dart. So if you are in Devon, it's just outside Totnes in a village called Stoke Gabriel. If you've ever been before to Sharpham, so it was planted 40 years ago, and it was planted at the Sharpham Trust site where there's an old Sharpham house. But unfortunately, about 2 years ago, that site was handed back. And so now all of the vines are at the Sandridge Barton estate, which is on the opposite side of the river. Still a beautiful place, still a lovely place to go and visit. And they've grown, a lot of the grapes have come from there from the past 15 years. So they grow a lot of the grapes for their wines themselves. This one, the Bacchus, they grow themselves. There's also Madeleine Angevine, their Dart Valley Reserve, which is a really lovely wine, very, very popular. And then they also have red, and they do sparkling as well.
I'm glad you said about the sparkling. So this, what you can see at the moment, is the vineyard overlooking the Dart River, which is just beautiful. And talking sparkling, that is a wonderful picture of Duncan. He's the head winemaker at Sandridge Barton. Duncan Schwab, pouring terribly, if you ask me, but
actually, if anybody was on our English wine tasting 2 years ago, we had Charlie with us, actually, the winemaker. So if anybody was on that wine tasting 2 years ago, we did an online tasting. We had Charlie Brown, so Duncan is the winemaker and has been there, 30 years, something like that. Whereas Charlie is sort of the young prodigy that's up and coming. So Charlie's sort of mid-20s.
Leanne's comment's really interesting as well, actually. I don't know if anybody has ever been to wineries while the grapes are ripe and had the opportunity to eat the grapes, because often they're really not very nice. But that's a really interesting comment. Leanne's put that the Bacchus grape is the only one that actually tastes like the wine does. Because certainly, grapes I've had Chardonnay from in Poligny Montrachet, actually, and it was horrible. It was the skin was really tough, and they've got pips in, don't forget. Wine grapes still have pips in, we haven't bred them out yet, and just really, really acidic and not at all nice to eat. And I've had Pinot Noir in Bollinger and they were awful again, because they're so
darling,
small.
It's so hard.
As I faint. The skins are really, really thick compared to the grapes that we eat. Completely different species. So the grapes that we make wine from, much thicker skins, much higher acidity, and again those pips in there. So for a grape to actually be edible and pleasant, I'm going to nip out to Sandridge Bartlett's.
Right, get yourself some Bacchus and just on the
table.
Definitely,
that's a really good tip. Thank you, Leanne.
Yeah. And just before it, there was a point made by Leanne earlier just about a recent blind tasting that was done by Chapel Down, where they took some wine over to France, which they sort of gave a French name to, so that people didn't know when they did a blind tasting. So it was an English sparkling wine and a French sparkling wine, and actually it turns out that most people preferred the English sparkling wine. But I'm not surprised, because I don't know. I mean, if people remember tasting champagne sort of 30, 40 years ago, I mean, I remember the first time I had a real proper grower champagne, which was probably about 30 years ago. The overriding memory was of these really fresh, crunchy, green Granny Smith apples. And it's not a flavour you tend to get very often with champagne now. It tends to be much richer. It tends to be much fuller and rounder in flavour now. Because of the warming temperature. And what we're making in England with the sparkling wines tends to be closer to what you used to get in champagne 30 years ago. It tends to be those sort of crunchy green apple flavours. So it doesn't surprise me that people preferred the English sparkling wine. Certainly, if you're having a celebration, English sparkling wine is the way to go. Shall we move on to wine number 3? Talking all things French. Shall we move on to Chardonnay?
I'm starting to put my Chardonnay, darlings.
So if you could bring up the title screen, please, Pip.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just cutting without getting my finger. There we are.
As Pip mentioned earlier, the wines we've chosen are the most.
We were with Duncan. Let's just move along from Duncan. Bear with. There we are. Sorry, go on, Dan.
So, the next wine number 3, Henners Native Grace Barrel Fermented Chardonnay, made by Boutinot Henners, and this is a 2020 vintage. So I was just saying that Pip mentioned the 3 grape varieties we've chosen today, the most planted ones in England. Bacchus, as we mentioned, is a Germanic cross and was planted here because of its ability to ripen in cooler climates. Chardonnay is very much a French grape, although we think of it as an international grape variety. Really, until the 1970s, you only found it in France, and really, you really only found it in Burgundy. So, although it's hundreds of years old, and coincidentally, it's a cross between 2 grape varieties. So it's Pinot Noir and Gouais Blanc were crossed to create Chardonnay, and there's another grape variety that also comes from that same crossing. Top points for anyone that can name that in the chat. This was a French variety from the village of Chardonnay in France, and it was only in the 1970s that it sort of found its way over to South Africa, and then from there it has now become the grape variety, not the most planted grape variety in the world, but the grape variety which has the widest spread, so is planted in the most places. And it's often referred to as the chameleon grape variety because of its ability to reflect terroir of the place in which it's planted. So let's have a taste of the English Chardonnay and see how we think it stacks up against other Chardonnays from around the world.
So
you've got 2 glasses of Chardonnay, Pip.
2 glasses, of course. That's what they call me, Pip 2 glasses. 2 jags. Actually, it's very true, because I'm known for always, pretty much every photo of me on social media, I've got 2 pairs of specs on. So yes, I am actually 2 glasses. Yep, Nikki's the same. It's the only way to keep them safe. You know where they are. So if we tilt, I've got both next to each other. If you're able to, please do. You'll notice a difference in colour. One of them is a white wine colour that you would expect, and one of them is not. But we'll talk about the first one before we come on to the second one, because they are really quite different. So the first Chardonnay, we showed the picture there of the bottle. So Henners, it is, as Dan said, down in Sussex. I beg your pardon? Yes, that place that we can't say very well. Hurstmanstenshaw is the best I can do.
Nikki is saying it without her microphone on. Nikki's telling us all the correct pronunciation.
You mean Hurstmanstenshaw?
Oh, that's
is that easy? It's so easy when you say it, Alison.
Yeah, well, I lived at Huxbear Point, and Hurstmanstenshaw is not very far away.
I see.
Hurstmanstenshaw.
Hurstmanstenshaw.
Yeah.
Well, firstly, this is Colette O'Leary. Thank you for the pronunciation. Hurstmanstenshaw. That's so much easier now. I know how to say it. This is Colette. She makes the wine. Those are her lovely vineyards in the background. And for this one, I can use the map that I normally do, but I just wanted to show you this because the actual winery is just above the castle. Flowers Green, just where it says Flowers Green, that's where the winery is. And you can see how close it is to the sea. This is only about 8 kilometers as the crow flies. But all these little tributaries, all these little canals and rivulets that you've got here, they are all adding to A, the humidity, B, the temperature difference, because obviously water holds heat better than land does, overlooking the Pevensey levels. And you get this wonderful fog that sort of sits there in the morning and keeps everything cool. And then in the afternoons, the sea breezes brush off the fog and the temperature rises, and that sea breeze actually brings the salt in. They have said that there's some mornings they go out into the vineyards but just before harvest, and you can actually see the salt crystals sitting on the vines. So if anybody is picking up a minerality or a salinity in the wine, I wonder why that might be. It is literally grown at the seaside. You can't really get much closer.
The sea used to be much closer, actually. So the Pevensey levels, a lot of those have been reclaimed. It's reclaimed land. So I mean, if you look on the map, the Pevensey Castle was on there, which is the 1066 castle. So that was where the landing. No, not the 1066 castle. We are close to battle, aren't we? Here?
It is Hastings,
yes, it is Hastings. Yes.
Let me bring it up again.
Yeah. So this was where the French troops landed in 1066. And
Hastings is just over here.
Pevensey Castle was right on the seafront, and now it's a mile away, something like that. And you can, if you go to Hurstmanstenshaw, if you go to Hurstmanstenshaw, you can stand there in the vineyard, just coming down the slope, and you can see, it's quite a long way, but you can see all the way out to sea. It's, as you say, it's the levels, it's very flat going out then, which would at one time, I guess, have probably been marshland.
Probably.
Yeah.
So yes, it's very, very close to the sea. That is the upshot. What are people getting? If you tell me what you're getting, smelling and tasting, we can explain where those come from. Although on this one, A, it's quite obvious, and B, it tells you on the label where a lot of the smells and flavours have come from. So it shouldn't be too much of a guess for everyone.
But I think what I love about this, if you like Burgundy wines, this has like a very similar character to a lot of Burgundy wines. Burgundy wines are becoming increased, and I've said this before, Burgundy wines can be more and more expensive. And actually this, for the price, £21, something like that, I think is a really, really good example. And one of the things, so this is made at the Henners vineyard, but it's made by Boutinot. And Boutinot have vineyards in England, in France, in South Africa. So they have an international portfolio. And one of the things that I think Boutinot do really well is make wines that sit comfortably in their international portfolio. So although this is English, it has these influences because Colette, who we showed, spends time with Julien, who makes wine in the Rhone, and she spends time with Eric, who makes wine in Burgundy, and she spends time with JD, who makes wine in South Africa. And so they all sort of pass information around and end up with wines that have this sort of DNA that runs through them, although they're very distinct wines for the place that they come from. But they sit really nicely, I think, in that international portfolio, which is lovely because, 10 years ago, as we say, England weren't making wines that the French would drink. Now you could give this to a Frenchman, not tell him it was from England, and he'd tell you it was bloody lovely.
Well, yeah, as I said, this is the one that indeed, thank you, Seb. Seb is our token Frenchman this evening. He concurs.
Yes, hopefully, Seb has said it's bloody lovely.
He's put indeed. He agrees. But yes, this was the one that beat the, absolutely hands down, beat the Burgundy of a similar price when we did it blind at the Judgment of Exeter. So we're very, very pleased with it. And interestingly, considering, for me anyway, sorry, bit of a barrel geek, considering the textures, if anybody wants to add in the chat, please feel free. Is it owned by the Vine? No, it's a chap called,
sorry, could you just, because of the videos, would you mind reading out the question before you answer it?
Is it owned by the Fines family, as in Sir Rafe? Do you know?
What owned by the Fines family?
Henners.
No, it's owned by Boutinot, which
That's
is
what I
owned
thought.
by Paul Boutinot.
It used to be owned by the Fines family.
Ah.
It was it's something to do with racing cars. The man that first owned or planted Henners was in some way involved in Formula One racing, and he then sold it to Henners 5 years ago, I think, something like that. And I can't remember his name or what his link to Formula One was.
We shall find out and get back to you. But thank you. We like questions. Yes, I was going to say the on the tasting note side, it's got lovely fruit, really, really ripe, fresh, sort of Granny Smith apple, peachy. That everything's almost baked as well. It's like baked apple, baked peach galette. Everything's fresh, but not crunchy, if that makes sense. But then there's the influence of the barrel, as the name suggests, and it's really quite smooth. It's got a wonderful texture, but there's a lovely toasty note to it as well, and almost hobnobs for me.
I think what's probably quite interesting, I think anyway, and probably for you as well, Pip, as a barrel geek. So quite often wine is fermented in stainless steel and then placed into oak to age and to give it some of those flavors and some of those textures. Here, as the name says, barrel fermented, this is actually fermented in the barrel as well. So the whole process happens in the barrel, which just adds to those flavors and those textures that you get.
Exactly, because it's only actually been matured in the barrel for 6 months. So that fermentation is what has been necessary to give it all those richness and the textures and the cheesiness and the yogurty and the leesy. It's really wonderfully complex, which you would expect from Burgundy of maybe something that's been in a barrel for 12 months plus. So this has been very lovingly crafted, I think, and very, very good with Quick's cheddar, I should say, as well.
It's working with my saucisson.
Saucisson?
My saucisson, yeah. I've also looked up, so the vineyard was planted by a chap called Lawrence Waugh, and he was an engineering consultant for Formula One, but had French family, which is where the Henners name came from. And then he sold the vineyard to Boutinot about 5 years ago. So it was planted in 2007 and then sold, I think, 2017.
I love that Nick is keeping us all very grounded as well.
Roll.
It's apparently goes very well with sausage roll and brings out the herbiness.
Very nice.
But it's pastry, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's lovely. Exactly.
Yes.
If it grows, it goes with it.
When I went to Hurstman, so one of the predominant features other than the vineyard was the sausage roll trees.
Brilliant. That's a well-known feature of the Pevensey levels.
Well, it's like the pasta trees in Italy, you know, the sausage roll trees in England.
Yes, good old panorama.
Yes.
It's worth pointing out as well. So that one was from 2020, which has kind of been lauded as the glorious vintage. Do you remember 2020?
Well, 2018 was lauded as the best vintage, wasn't it?
But 2020, if you remember, was when we were all locked down. And spring, it was like we had summer in springtime. I remember being furloughed and sat outside on my little patio getting sunburn in March. I was like, what is going on? This is ridiculous. It was so warm in springtime. But then they had quite a bit of rainfall in August, which is just what they needed because it stopped the grapes from being too parched. And then it got another heat wave in September, a bit of an Indian summer. So you sort of started off with heat and then a little bit of cool and then rain and then cool and then heat and then cool again. And it was pretty much a perfect growing season for Chardonnay. And that's another reason why we've got so much complexity and weight and texture in the wine as well. But the next one,
it's also just whilst we're on points about the wine, if you bring up the slide again, because we're going to need the cover screen for number 4, but just keep on number 3 for now, if you could, because I just want to point something out as well.
On this one?
So go to the cover slide for wine number 3. So the bottle also looks, I think, quite stylish for Henners. So back one more.
Yeah, getting there. Sorry, hang on.
That's all right. Yeah.
Hang on.
And when they so the first time they made this was 2018, which was another really great year, and it's often talked about as being the best vintage that England has had so far. So they first made this barrel fermented Chardonnay in 2018. So this was the first. So this photograph is from that first vintage in 2018, and you can see. So from a sustainability point of view, they want to make as many of the wines as sustainable as they can. So rather than putting the plastic capsule on the top of the bottle, which you can't recycle, they used paper. So you can see the paper strip that's just stuck over the top of the bottle, and you'll see this in quite a lot of bottles now. And it's a much more environmentally friendly way of bottling and packaging the bottle. When the 2020, which we're now drinking, was released, it no longer had the paper strip on it, had a screw cap on it. And so I asked Colette why they'd taken the paper off, because the paper was sustainable and it looked really nice. Why have you done it? And it's because they had to put all of those bits of paper on by hand, and it took them days to do it. So she said, we refused to put the paper on any further. So now, rather than being cork and paper, it's now under screw cap. But no worse for that.
Absolutely not. But I like that reason why. It's good.
Yes.
So if you haven't already, do start on wine number 4. I'll just zoom forward in my presentation.
I mean, the first thing that I noticed about wine number 4, go on, let's, whilst we're finding the first thing I noticed is the colour.
Oh, yeah.
The colour's very different.
It's a bit different, isn't it? Would you say it's a tinge of orange then?
I think it's a tint of orange in this one.
Tinge of orange?
Yes.
We could go coral if you wish.
So, wine number 4 is Huxbear, Orange Bear, Chardonnay from Devon, and again, we're on 2020. And yeah, I guess the clue's there in the name, isn't it? Orange Bear. Tell us more.
It's 12%, this one. So the previous vintage of this, forgive my pronunciation, was a blend of Huxbear and the other one,
Schönberger.
Schönberger.
Huxbear and
Both very
Schönberger.
dramatic.
Yeah.
Because 2020, I mean, it was delicious. It was absolutely delicious. No longer available, unfortunately. But because 2020 was such a great harvest, Ben decided, let's just see what happens. And he left a little bit of the Chardonnay resting on with its skins to see what happens. And they actually ended up having skin contact and fermentation for 5 weeks, which is quite a long time, getting a little bit of that colour through. And this is what happened. He hadn't intended to make an orange wine with Chardonnay. It's just sort of one of those, let's just give it a go and see what happens. And well, in my humble opinion, heck has it worked. Wow, it's so complex, it's so juicy. For people that aren't familiar with orange wine, very brief explanation. It's essentially making white wine the way we make red wine. So normally with a white grape, we just pick it, crush it, press it to get the juice out, done. Ferment in stainless steel or oak barrels to get different flavors, textures, etc. With red wine, we leave the skins in contact with the juice while the fermentation is happening, because that allows the color, the body, the texture, the tannins, etc. to seep out of the grape skins and into the juice. And I think often we assume that white wine is made from green grapes, like the kind of grapes that we would eat. They're very green, but often they're not. So Chardonnay is a wonderful, very dark yellow, almost orange in colour. Pinot Gris is like a sort of dusky pink, almost, well, grey, funnily enough, comes from the name, almost purple. Gewürztraminer looks a bit like a sunset on a sphere. It's absolutely beautiful. You've got pinks and oranges and different hues of purple and pinks in there. It's gorgeous.
It's a little bit showy. I said it's a little bit showy for me.
Very showy.
It's a bit blousy, a bit showy. Yeah.
But the point is, most grapes that make white wine aren't green. So if we leave the skins in contact with the juice, you get some of that colour through. So Chardonnay gives us this wonderful, very dark yellow, almost orange colour. And that's what we mean by orange wine. It hasn't been made with oranges. We haven't put orange food colouring into it. Get asked these questions a lot. It has just had the skins of the grapes that make it, and it's treated more like a red wine than a white wine.
It's simple. I think in lots of ways. So if you like rosé wine, if you look at a rosé wine, people think that rosé wine is pink. But quite often, I mean, we often describe it as onion skin, is the colour of very pale Provence rosé. It's much more orange than it is pink, and as you're saying, it's the same process, isn't it? It's just that you're leaving the skins longer here for an orange wine than you would for a rosé wine. Sometimes rosé can be minutes, that it's on the skins just to get that hint of colour. Whereas here, sorry, I forgot how long you said, Pip. I was listening, I promise. How
5
many
weeks?
5 weeks. But it gives it that, and you can imagine, that Chardonnay is a yellowy coloured grape. You can imagine if you did that with a more intensely coloured wine for 5 weeks, you get a more intense orange, which is why sometimes you go and buy an orange wine and they are orange. They look orange. Yeah. Whereas this one's a much more subtle colour. Oh, in fact, Pip may have one that she can show us. But
it was interesting that you'd talk about rosé, Dan, because for me this is almost a cross between a rosé and a dry sherry in taste.
Yeah, I like that.
I love the suggestion of dry sherry, actually. So I was at a rosé tasting on Monday in Birmingham, and some of the rosés that we tasted were almost like, a Manzanilla sherry. They had that sort of savoury, salty, mineral, dryness about them. And yeah, I think you're getting similar tones, overtones here.
Definitely.
Did you have a bottle of orange wine to show us, Pip?
And almost a slight, I don't want to say oxidation because it's not oxidized, but there is an element of something that, like sherry, that oxidative. It's probably a better description. This is just one that I happened to open last night. This is actually a Sauvignon Blanc orange wine. Look at the colour. Much darker. Just fancied an orange wine of an evening, that's all.
So Seb's just asked how orange wine started. And orange wine actually is...
That's a very good question.
Probably one of the oldest kinds of wine in the world. So if you think about, there is an argument as to whether Georgia or Armenia is the birthplace of wine. And
Georgia.
So Armenia have just found some artifacts that outdate Georgia.
Wow.
So they are now claiming, and then give it a few weeks and Georgia will suddenly find an artifact that's older than the one that they found in Armenia. So there's this ongoing battle where they each keep finding older and older artifacts. No, it was us. No, it was us. And that's often seen. Hello, Katie. That's often seen as the birthplace of one of those is the birthplace of wine. And orange wines are fairly typical from those places, because when wine was first made, everything was just thrown into the great big clay pots that they had and left on their skins, and it was all different colours of wines, and whatever came out would be much closer to an orange wine than anything that we know today. You know, they didn't make red wine, they didn't make rosé wine, they just made wine. But the colour of it would have been much closer, and probably the profile would have been much closer to this.
No, sorry, substance, wasn't it Noah? Anyway, who made the first wine? I'm going to move on from that.
No, it was Jesus at the wedding, wasn't it? Where someone gave him some water and he turned it into wine. And he turned it into wine. Yeah. Although I so just as a divergent point here, so I was brought up a Methodist. For those who know anything about Methodism, obviously we don't drink. It works really well for a wine merchant. And being a cheeky child as I was, when I had to do my temperance exam, I asked. I've frozen. I don't know whether I'm just talking to myself now.
No, we can hear you, but you are frozen with your eyes closed.
So yes, as a cheeky child doing my temperance exam, I asked the teacher, you know, why can't we drink? If Jesus turned water into wine, then why is it that as Methodists we don't drink? And she said, well, because it was just at that moment that he turned it into wine, so it was freshly pressed grape juice, so it hadn't fermented, so it wasn't alcoholic.
Right.
That was the response. Yes. So Nikki, as a Baptist in Baptist church, would be exactly the same. We had Ribena as well, Nikki, at our communion as a Methodist.
Also, I like your
very different in the Catholic Church.
I like your comment, Nikki, about the flavour. It really does last. So I've showed an orange wine recently. Friends asked me to do a little wine tasting for their birthday, which was very kind of them. And I took an orange wine, not this one, unfortunately, because I couldn't get it, but this one, they had those little, you've seen the little sticks of manchego that are wrapped in ham. They had those, and they had sweet chili Thai fish cakes as well. And they had just normal manchego and normal cured meat, which is what I've got for my little cured meat platter. And they said, what will it go with? And I said, well, pretty much everything that's on the table right now. So we're going to start with the least flavorful wine, and we're going to move up. And ended up tasting this wine with all the different things on the table, and then got to the Thai chili fish cakes, which were quite spicy. They had a bit of a punch to them. And then you tasted the wine again, and it was still there. It still had this amazing, almost grapefruit, lychee, slightly gingery quality to it. It was really, really quite expressive. And to manage all those different foods, there's not many wines can handle that. So what flavours are you getting in this? Because I think it sounds a bit daft, but the first thing I always get on this particular wine is a very distinct orange peel. So it's not orange juice, it's very much orange peel, more pithy, more savoury.
It's quite waxy, isn't it? So when you put your nose in there, like peel or pith, it's quite waxy. And the thing that I think surprised me a little bit is when you think of, or when I think of Chardonnay, I always think of those really sort of buttery notes that you get with Chardonnay. And having spent time on its skins, I thought it was going to be more buttery than it is. But actually, it's waxy.
No, I think that's it. It spent time on its skins, but not its lees necessarily.
Yeah. But yeah, maybe I was, because it was on its skins, I was thinking, oh, it'll have got some of those flavours as well. So yeah, maybe that's just my...
So I've just been forced to pull the rest of my wine. I wasn't going to, but I have to. And I've got more in the glass now, and there's something green. There's something very vegetal, almost pear skin. There's definitely the orange. There's something almost slightly smoky. There's something quite phenolic.
There's something nutty, I think, as well.
There's definitely something nutty. There's something mineral. There's something a little bit spicy, like the ginger. What genre of flavour haven't we? Oh, and the sherry, yes, that sort of floor, slightly. I wanted to say slightly fungal, but that's not polite. But you know what I mean. It's that again, the oxidative kind of quality.
We should have invited Ben, shouldn't we? So he could have told us what he was aiming
we should have. Oh, I've just got fennel. I just got a waft of fennel as well. And I've been eating this very mature cheddar and various cured meats, and it's still there. It is just such an extraordinary, when when I do wine education and I tell people it could be fruity, it could be floral, it could be vegetal, it could be industrial, it could be chemical, it could be woody, it could be spicy, all these animal, there's all these different sort of genre of smells and flavors that I go through. This has got them all, and it's actually really quite extraordinary.
What you don't get with this, so quite often with Chardonnay, you do get that sort of slightly appley note, that slightly sort of fruit, you know, fresh green appley fruit and maybe citrus, and I don't think you get any of that with this. I don't think it's got any of those.
There's definitely a citrus, but it's very much orange citrus rather than lemon lime citrus.
Yeah, where quite often with Chardonnay you will get
more lemon. Yeah. Do you like it? I think is the big question, because we've been talking about it a lot, but how has it gone down? Thumbs up. Oh yes. Oh no, you will. Don't worry, Nikki. So Nikki's she was worried she won't be able to taste anything else. You will, because we're moving on to reds. So there is a reason why we've gone like this. But yeah, for a white wine to pack that much punch, I think that's fine.
You could, so you can definitely find places that for me where this would work really well. And it's a really savoury wine. So there's lots of food pairings that you could do with it, really robust food pairings that you wouldn't necessarily put white wines with. But for me...
Sorry, I've just thought of herb-crusted rack of lamb would be lovely.
It would, yes. And it's those sorts of food pairings, isn't it, where typically you wouldn't think of a white wine, whereas an orange wine would work really well with those. But personally for me, I would go with number 3. If I had to choose out of 3 and 4 from the Chardonnays, it would be number 3 for me over number 4.
Nice. Well, we've got some nice, I like Alexa's comment, quaffable, but not your favourite. But you wouldn't throw it in a plant at a party, so we're good. You like it. Still number 1 for Tracy et al. Oh, thank you, Seb. Definitely. So Seb's put he discovered it on a tour at Huxbear, and I'd recommend going there. I cannot qualify that statement enough. I took friends there last summer, end of June, actually probably about now, last year. My friend she'd been dragged around vineyards by me on various holidays before, but her boyfriend Bash, he'd never been to a vineyard, and the way that Lucy explains the literal blood, sweat, tears, sleepless nights, hard work, tantrums, weight loss, broken limbs that goes into actually building a vineyard from scratch is absolutely phenomenal. The way she elocutes, the way she explains it, it really hits home. And I think everybody on that little tour came away thinking, gosh, I think I need to give it a bit more reverence now, because she really, really explains what goes into it. And we often get asked, why is English wine so expensive, relatively speaking? And I think do a tour at Lucy and Ben's vineyard in Huxbear, and they will explain why it is that.
I think there's
and sorry, if you want to know what Lucy and Ben look like,
there they are. I think there's two things there that I just want to maybe pick up on a little more, which is, so in terms of the cost of English wine. So actually, if you compare it like for like, we just had the Henners Chardonnay. If you compare that to a similar Chardonnay from Burgundy, it's priced absolutely as it should be. I think what you get with Ben and Lucy actually is great value. If you take the Huxbear Classic Sparkling, their sparkling wine, which we sell for around about £24, and you compare that to a champagne, it's great value as a comparison. Actually, you're getting much more value from theirs. And I think the other thing, just to pick up on from what you were saying there, if you've ever done a vineyard tour in England, if you've been to any vineyard in England, quite a lot of the vineyards in England now have actually got a lot of money behind them. You go around places like Calancoon, which was founded by Caroline and Lance, lovely couple, but clearly made a lot of money somewhere in the world at some point somehow. You go around Gusbourne or Hattingley Valley, or Chapel Down was mentioned in the chat earlier, all run by really great people, but people that had an incredible amount of money. And there's the old joke, you know, how do you make a small fortune in wine? Start with a large fortune. And that's very true, you know, in England, that a lot of people have put a lot of money into their vineyards. Ben and Lucy had, you know, fairly typical jobs in IT, didn't start with vast amounts of money, bought a 7-hectare plot in the Team Valley that was a farm for not very much, lived in a caravan for 7 years whilst they planted their vineyard and allowed it to actually start producing fruit, and then upgraded their caravan to a wooden hut, which they still live in, completely off grid, with compost toilets and solar panels and a borehole and rainwater harvesting and all these things. It is a great place to go, but it is very unusual, I think, in English winemaking, in that they have done it on such a tight budget.
It's almost like when, as Dan says, you can go to some of these places that are all glorified and they polish their gravel and they trim the trees and it all looks perfect, but they're farmers at the end of the day, and I think we forget that sometime. And yeah, that really comes through. The rusticness and the hard work and the effort is clearly evident when you go there. But
it's well worth it, definitely. Shall we move on?
Mercantile, that's a good word, Seb, who's done visits in Burgundy to know how mercantile it is.
Yes. I love that. Just, Huxbear is like witnessing an artist going through a painting.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Definitely. And I will, while we're talking about the vineyards,
But yes, Nikki, South Africa. Nikki's just mentioned South Africa. South African winemakers often think of themselves as farmers rather than winemakers. There is no snobbery, there is no pretension to South African winemaking generally, in the same way that, you know, with Ben and Lucy, there is no pretension there. You know, they are farmers crafting something beautiful from their land.
Definitely.
But that in itself sounded pretentious, didn't it?
Not at all. It sold it beautifully, and that just to show why their vineyard works. It's a bit of a blur. Apologies for the quality of the picture, but you can see the slope. That means it's got perfect angle to the sun going southwesterly, and that's why it works beautifully.
There is a picture somewhere of me walking down that slope with Lucy.
I also found a picture of you and Ben and Lucy and someone else in the picture, and I decided not to use it.
Shall we move on to wine number 5?
We're moving on to reds.
Screen, Pip.
Pinot Noir, the second most planted grape variety in England. We hopefully.
Can we just put up the.
What would you like?
Sheet? Is that okay? Just pop up the cover sheet so we know what it is that we are drinking.
Tasting, Dan.
Tasting. Sorry, I'm not drinking. I'm tasting.
Hattingley Valley, still Pinot Noir. They put the still there because Hattingley Valley historically has been known. They planted it in 2008, and they've ever since the first crop they've been growing sparkling wine. And it was only 2018, I think, they tried making Pinot Noir still, and it didn't work. 2019 they tried making Pinot Noir still, and it didn't work, and it was only because of the glorious vintage of 2020 that made it possible that the fruit was big enough and ripe enough and bold enough to give us what we now have in our glasses, hopefully. But this has been made very sympathetically to the French. Essentially, it's French oak barrels. It's minimal intervention in that sense, but it is all about the environment. And Dan mentioned it about Chardonnay recognizing where it's from. Pinot Noir is the equivalent in red, also from Burgundy, but it really takes from its environment more than any red grape variety, I would argue. You can literally plant something in different vineyards next to each other. One can be clay, one can be chalk, one can be gravel, one's more granite rich, and they will each taste different because it just really absorbs the minerality and the goodness in the soil. It really, really comes through.
Well, it's why in Burgundy, isn't it? You know, if anyone
exactly
familiar with Burgundy,
tiny parcels.
Yeah, and you can have, you know, appellations that are tiny, that can be, you know, just a couple of vineyards, and people are able to pick out, you know, the qualities from that particular vineyard because of the way that Pinot Noir reflects the terroir on which it is grown. But that said, it's a bit of a awful grape to grow. You know, you have to get conditions right, don't you? It is
well, if we believe the French, only the French can grow Pinot Noir properly. Sorry, Seb. Forgot you were there a minute. No, they've just, it goes back to what we said before about the judgment. They've had generations and generations and generations of practice. Everybody else is still working it out. There's a winemaker I know in New Zealand. His dad started the project before him, and then he carried it on. So over best part of 2 decades, they were working out what clones to use, which soil to plant those clones in, which barrel worked best from which forest, etc., etc., how long to leave it for. And that was actually my Pinot Noir epiphany, of having one wine that just tasted like liquid cherry velvet, which was from one particular vineyard in one barrel, and then another exactly the same grape but a different soil was it was much more savory, very animal, very chocolatey as well. And then the third one, which he got very excited about, just smelled like horse shit. And he was really, really excited by that, because the French have this wonderful terroir, and they say they're the only ones that can get that manure, that funky quality. But actually, if you work hard enough, this was a New Zealand one, as I say, they worked it out, they got the right combination. But yeah, it doesn't like being too hot, it doesn't like being too cold, it doesn't like frost, it's got a very, very thin skin. So even strong winds at harvest time, if the leaves are hitting the grapes, it can split the skins. It doesn't like being too cold. It's a petulant child, really. It just sort of throws tantrums if it's not treated properly.
I've said it before, Pip, it's like the girl in the nursery rhyme, isn't it? You know,
yes, when she was good, she was very, very good, and when she was
bad,
she was horrid.
rotten. Yes. Yes.
And
that is Pinot Noir. But it is showing great promise in England.
It is.
And so we've got here today, so number 5 is from Hampshire, and number 6, when we come on to it, is from Devon. And if you get the chance, and Leanne said this earlier as well, try some of the Lyme Bay peanuts as well, which are from Essex. And essentially you're getting riper and riper and riper as you move further east because of the sunshine and the number of sun hours.
It's worth pointing out, though, that I tried to do a lot of research on this wine today on the Hattingley Valley website, and it's not there because it was such a small yield. It was extremely high quality, but it was a very low yield because they had frosts in springtime that killed off a lot of the flowers. And if you haven't got flower, you haven't got fruit.
Do you know where most of it went, Pip?
I beg your pardon?
Do you know where most of it went?
What?
The Pinot Noir from 2020 from Hattingley Valley.
I do not.
It went in our warehouse.
Oh no, that's what I figured. I was getting to that.
we bought most of their production.
That's what I was leading to. That you can't buy it through Hattingley Valley anymore because we've got it all. That's why. But the point was that it was a lower yield, but the quality, what did survive, was absolutely exceptional. And yes, Chris has put a comment that it's disappointing finish. This is still very young. I mean, for now, drinking it with some mature cheddar and some cured meats, for me, it's delightful. But I reckon if you left this a couple of years, it would really, it would embolden. Is that a word to use? Does that make sense?
It sounds good. Yeah.
Thank you. Thumbs up from Chris. Happy days. It would just everything. It's still very young. It was very, very low yield. It just needs a little bit of time just to really relax. And I've got a thumbs up from Leanne as well. Thank you. It is a word. I'm having it. It will almost fortify it. Not in the sense of adding alcohol, but just make it stronger. Everything will become bigger, more rounded, more mellow, as an aged Pinot Noir should. and those lovely sort of slightly funky nuts will start coming through as well. This is mostly grown on chalk, by the way, so it will have a slight minerality to it as well. And I think that is a very good comment as well, Nikki. I've got cheese and charcuterie. Olives is not the best nibble for a Pinot Noir, I'm afraid. The olives would have been good with the Bacchus, the nice saltiness from it. But yeah, I agree, Chris. We want to know how it's going with sausage rolls. It should be really nice with sausage rolls.
It goes with the saucisson. I know that's not quite the same thing.
It's the buttery pastry that's adding to it, isn't it?
Well, it has got those lovely sort of not buttery, but they sort of smooth flavours from the barrel.
Yes.
It's got a really lovely, I think, roundness to it that's coming from the French oak that it's been in. And I think what's nice for I think about this is actually, you know, we spoke earlier about the sort of, you know, the very short history of this current wave of English winemaking, and the fact that, you know, 40 years ago we had this ridiculous acidity, and, you know, maybe for the past sort of 10 or 15 years we've been getting better at making sparkling wine, because actually the acidity, you need the acidity in sparkling wine. And then, you know, we've been making still wines, and lots of the still wines that you can buy or have been able to buy for the past 10 years have been made from these Germanic clones. But actually now we're starting to make wines with these well-regarded grapes like Chardonnay or Pinot, which is sort of the holy grail for most winemakers. You know, they want to be able to prove that they can make a good Pinot Noir, because it's so hard to do. And the fact that in England now, you know, we are making these incredibly quaffable red wines from Pinot Noir, I think is a huge testament to how far English winemaking has come in the past 10 years.
Definitely. And actually, if I just share my screen, that was just a picture of the barrels, because I'm a nerd. I like barrels. But the picture previous, so this is, come along, why isn't it working? There we are. This is Rob McCulloch, who is the current head winemaker. But when the wine that you're tasting now, the 2020 was made, it was a lady called Emma Rice, and she is quoted as saying, this is like the epitome of English winemaking. If you can make a really good Pinot Noir, then we've nailed it, we've arrived. And that's kind of what she's always wanted to achieve. So it's sort of her swan song when she left the winery and moved on. But I'm glad she did.
What, move on?
No, make it. And just as a little, because I'm also a wildlife nerd, you might have noticed on the bottle shot and on the barrel was a picture of a butterfly. Before they built the vineyards here in 2008, they actually got a full fauna and flora survey done, so they could identify exactly what was there, so that they weren't disturbing any habitats, so that they could improve on habitats if necessary. And they found that they have the silver washed fritillary, which is this beautiful creature here. It's called the silver washed because when its wings are folded, it's got this wonderful sort of sheen, or almost opalescent sheen on it. And it's very rare to find the silver washed fritillary in the UK. So they were really, really pleased that it basically lives in their vineyard for summer and then disappears off back to Morocco. So we should look after it. So they are actively sustaining its habitat by having the vineyard there. Warm and fuzzy.
We can feel good about drinking the wine then, because we're helping to support the butterfly.
We're helping the environment drink more.
Yeah, excellent drink. Well, actually, on that one, just as a slight aside, so a friend sent me a meta-analysis yesterday that's just been completed on all the studies that have been done over the past 25 years on the effects of drinking wine on health. And the meta-analysis, so where they've compared all these studies where it's, you know, several million participants over 25 years from 50 studies, their conclusion was that a moderate amount of red wine each day is good for your heart. And they have put in their conclusion that that should actually be part of a recommendation for a healthy diet.
Oh yeah.
Yes. If anybody wants to, I can share the report with you.
I've been saying this for years. I mean, I'm 72, darling, and look at me. I agree, Seb's just put it's one of your 5 a day, definitely.
Well, I mean the report hasn't gone this far yet, Seb, but what I'm thinking is if you get a blend, if you get a Rhone blend where you may have 5 different grape varieties in there, then surely that's 5 of your 5 a day.
Yes. I'm really healthy as well, Leanne. We're very healthy. So we move on to our final wine. Well, the final wine we are showing for you.
Nikki, just before we do that, Nikki's asked what constitutes moderate. That's a very good question.
Moderate, that is a very good question. See, I heard somebody say that it should be a glass. It's a friend of mine who lives at the village. They're both doctors, and they say a glass of red wine a day, the polyphenols in the antioxidants outweigh the ill effects of the alcohol. So much my response was, how big is your glass? Because I have got one somewhere that takes a whole bottle, so I'm only having one glass. It's just very, very big. So final wine that we have for you, you can have more after this if you wish, of course, is still Pinot Noir, but I'm hoping
can we put the screen up for
of course, sorry,
for those that will be watching the recording later.
And the recording. So here we are with the fritillary.
So we are going to move on to wine number 6, which we're back to Huxbear again.
Huxbear Arcas. Does anybody know who or what Arcas is? That apart from Dan, put your hand down, Dan. 12%, 2021. Arcas, it was on the label actually. Arcas is the Great Bear. Because Zeus and Callista, this is all Greek mythology. Zeus and Callista.
It's all Greek to me.
Sorry?
It's all Greek to me.
All Greek to me, indeed. Zeus and Callista had a child, which was Arcas, but Callisto became the form of a bear and went to talk to Arcas, but Arcas didn't recognise his mother because she was in bear form, and he tried to kill her. So to stop Arcas killing Callisto, Zeus turned him into stars. So Ursa Minor is Callisto and Ursa Major is Arcas. Just didn't think you'd get some mythology in here as well, did you? Thought it was all wine.
And so the other point on that one for Huxbear, so although in Devon most Devonian people would pronounce it Huxbear,
Huxbear, yes.
Yes, neither Ben nor Lucy are from Devon, so they've always said Huxbear. And so, oh look, I had some kind of flying insect on my wine. And so all of the wines that they have produced are named after bears. So there is this one, which is Arcas, and the rosé is Callisto, and we had Orange Bear earlier, and there's Dancing Bear, which is the Chardonnay that they do. So they've all got names of bears, which is lovely.
Which is nice.
Yes.
Should point out this one, and I forgot to mention it about the orange one, I do apologise. The orange one was unfined, unfiltered and minimal sulfites. This one is unfiltered and unfined. So if it does have a little bit of a cloud or a little bit of a sediment, that is completely normal. It's just bits of grip. It's completely harmless. It'll just, the analogy I always give is like if your tea bag split in your cup of tea, it's just tea. It's just a bit more bitty than you'd expect, but it's completely normal. But hopefully even just that first swirl and that first sniff, you will smell the difference in this immediately. And something, if anybody wants,
very different here, Pip. What is it?
That's what I'm going to try and get the people to guess. If you want to hazard a guess as to what it is that's making this smell completely different to the Pinot Noir we've just had, please pop it in the chat or up on your mic.
Is it a different clone, Pip? Is that what it is?
Nope.
Is it different soil?
Very minimally, but that's not the main thing.
Is it?
Nikki's on the right track.
This one is picked by Devonian people, whereas the other one is picked by Hampshire.
This one's generally picked by Devonian public as well, so it could be anything in there. That's a good point though, actually. If you do want to have a really, really good day out and you're anywhere near Devon, they encourage people to come down and harvest at harvest time. But Nick has put a very good observation. Is it stainless steel rather than barrels? You're so close, Nikki. So close.
Cast iron.
No. The first Pinot Noir, we saw the barrel. That one is French oak. This one is all American oak. An American oak, it grows a lot faster. It has a lot sweeter flavour. It has a wider grain and a stronger flavour as well. So it gives its flavour much more punchily. It's much more obvious. I used to, until a couple of years ago, I used to say that the effect that you get on wine from French and American oak is like, it's like the presidents, basically, of France and America. But I can't say that anymore. But think of the orange one. That's kind of the effect that you get from American oak. French oak is a lot more demure, a lot more elegant, a lot more clean. And it is a little bit younger, Nikki. Nikki's commented that it tastes younger, less mature, and it is only by a year, but it still makes a difference. So again, this just sitting in the barrels for, I think this was 8 months, I believe. I'm happy to stand corrected on that, but I think it's 8 months. You can taste and smell the difference. The oak textures that we're getting is a lot more vanilla. It's a lot sweeter. Whereas on the previous one, it was sort of more toasty and almost coffee-esque. This one's definitely getting more of the American oak notes, the vanilla, the coconut, etc.
I think with this as well, so the difference in the years, so 20 and 21, so two very different years in terms of the weather as well. So 20, as Pip mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Chardonnay, was this, you know, incredibly warm spring and then a big warm Indian summer at the end. 21 wasn't a good year at all. 21 was a really wet year. You know, the summer wasn't that great. In fact, lots and lots of winemakers in the UK struggled to make anything in 21. I know Sharpham in particular, you know, they had no Pinot Noir to spare to make a red wine. They could only put that into their sparkling wine. Other winemakers that we work with didn't make any red wine at all in 21. So I think for Ben to have produced anything in 21 red is pretty impressive. And actually, what he's got here, I think there's something that's slightly brighter on the finish of this. I think you get, because it was cooler, you don't necessarily get as much ripeness, but what you get is more acidity, and that acidity gives it a sort of lift at the finish.
Almost more perfumed as well.
Yeah.
Like potpourri. But yes, to answer Nikki's question, yes, it would. Pinot Noir ages extremely well, especially when it's had oak influence. So they would both age very well, but you would get very different end results. Whereas the Hattingley Valley would give us a almost typical Burgundian, very feminine style. This one, because of the American oak, that would all just soften down and mellow, and wonderful truffle notes would come through. So this would be much more masculine, almost more like a sort of Gevrey Chambertin style, much more savoury on the finish as well. But they will both definitely age. And as Dan's mentioned, 21, Burgundy particularly, and England, there was not much about. So it's a good one to get your hands on. And the Hattingley Valley, 20, they haven't got any left. So
tobacco and aftershave.
Get your hands on.
Yes. So Nikki's getting notes of tobacco and aftershave. Any particular brand of aftershave?
Oh, I like that.
Yes, and some.
There's some. I know what you mean. It's that very masculine, musky, savoury, almost like black pepper, clove kind of waft. I like that comment. I've moved on to the Italian salami now. It's delicious.
I think you can as well. I know you mentioned truffle earlier. You sort of do get, you know, very slightly that sort of forest floor as well when you stick your nose in there. It's got that you know, almost pine as well, pine forest floor about it.
Okay, I'll top up, Dan. You don't have to.
Yeah, try it again and let us know what you think.
Fine.
I'm just going to go back in.
We're going in.
Yeah, well, no, I've just gone back to the Hattingley Valley just to compare the two.
Oh, okay.
And Leanne said it's you know, the opportunity to actually put your nose in both of them at the same time, I think is great. to identify those differences.
Thank you, Leanne. I missed that comment. That was really nice. Yeah, because when do you get the chance to try 2 English Pinot Noirs side by side with different winemaking techniques as well? But likewise, the Chardonnay and the Bacchus. So even though we've only had 6 wines and none of them have been sparkly or rosé, we didn't even touch on rosé. Goodness me, there is so much more to English wine that I think people realise. And yeah, this is just a teeny tiny snapshot, but the 3 greatliest, that's definitely not a word, the 3 best, oh help me, the 3,
I don't know what you're trying to say, Pip, otherwise I would.
the most amount of plantings, there's an adjective for that.
the mostly biggest
amount of plantings in England. We've tried 2 examples of both of them, of all 3 of them, that are very, very different. So sorry. Hey, it turned out, Nikki, I don't know if you were in the one when we were talking about altitudinous vineyards, and then it was with Argentina when Susie Atkins was tasting with us, and I said it was altitudinous, and she texted the next day saying, I've just looked it up, altitudinous is actually a word. So yay. My made up words aren't always made up. But yes, the point is 3 grape varieties, 2 different styles of each grape variety, but very different. What have been favourites? As I always say, you can have favourite for all of them if you like. So Tracy's got in there before me. I like 1 and 6 and 5 for Martin. Excellent. But look, Tracy, there's just the difference in there between wine number 1 and wine number 6 is completely vast. And likewise, Nikki, 1, 2 and 5.
I have to remind myself now of all of the wines that we've tasted, aren't I? Oh wow, 1. Will you put your nose back in 1? It's so interesting, isn't it? It's just big and
I think that's another good comment though. The fact that you're now going back to a white wine, basically an hour and a half after we tasted it first, and it's still giving. It's still there. It's still got life.
Yeah.
And actually having it slightly warmer out of the fridge is of benefit. It doesn't have to be cold.
I mean, that reminds me in lots of ways of the Peter Folker Sauvignon Blanc.
Yes,
put my nose
definitely. That guava note, definitely. Yeah. I love Leanne's diplomacy there. They all have their place and are great examples of English wine. We chose well. Thank you, Leanne.
Come on, Leanne. Have you actually chosen a favourite though, Leanne?
Leanne, favourite, please. Putting people on the spot now.
And then number 2.
Alison one was fabulous.
It's got that minerality, hasn't it? It's got a lovely minerality. Number 2.
Leanne's just put no. She's not choosing. That's fine. Leanne is in my camp. I don't need to choose a favourite wine because I like them all, but for very different reasons. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Alison. Thank you.
Like number 3's got hazelnuts that are coming through now.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I think they're all. If anybody has any left, just allowing them to sit in the glass, it really shows you how much life they've got and how they would then develop in the bottle as well. That's great. Leftover wine. I do apologise. Sorry. Apparently, some people have it sometimes. So, does anyone have any final questions or comments before Dan reminds you about decanter?
Number 4's like halloumi.
Halloumi? That's what cheese says when it sees itself in the mirror. That's the sort of saltiness. Yeah. Sorry, Mickey.
Sorry, I'm just going through them all now, and I feel like I have to get all the way through and give you a new comment on each. Number 5.
There are more cheesy jokes where that came from, but I'll leave it for another occasion, I think. So, Dan, what were you asking about decanter of everyone? Because everyone's still here.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So we are currently doing our submission for the Decanter Retail Awards for 2023. And so one of the things that they've asked us to do is to put together a video for the judges which sort of gives them more about what we do as a business, as a company. So we will obviously talk sort of, I'll get Pip later, she doesn't know this yet, to do some chat, and we're going to piece together some of the videos that we've done in the past. But yeah, if anybody is willing to just go on camera and just have a quick sort of soundbite talking head that we could then put in our video about why Wycombe's should win one of the Decanter Retail Awards for 2023, we'd be really grateful. So anybody that wants to to sort of come on camera and say that, thank you in advance of anything that you might say. I will edit it, so if anybody says anything really horrible, I'll just leave that out.
We have the power. Well, Alison's put the customer service as extraordinary. Thank you,
Alison. Would you go on camera, Alison, and say that?
If you'd like me to.
That'd be lovely.
We'd love you to.
I think the way you solved my problem was extraordinary. Dan. You did very well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Have you heard from what were they called, Le Gazergue at all?
I have, yes, yeah.
Oh,
So yes, thank you very much for putting me in touch. So this is Terrasse du Lazac in Languedoc, and so yes, the